much more, for me, it's much more complicated to handle wheat at the manufacturing of flour and distribution of flour level than rice or any other crop for that respect.
Just a
Uh,
small question there, Ricardo. Can wheat, the quality of the wheat vary from year to year based on growing weather and that kind of thing? So the wheat that you bought one year could be different in another
yeah,
year.
it
How does
does.
that work?
Sorry.
How how does that work?
Well, it works fine or not. It depends on how it varies. Sometimes, you have very low grades of gluten content or protein, and it's not good bread wheat. And you have those massive amounts of feed wheat to export then. But it's quite complex because it's all chemical, the resistance of the wheat, the way it grows in the oven, and how much it keeps that growth, the interaction between the yeast and the bread, and very complicated, very complicated.
So you need to know the quality of the wheat you're buying, even if it's from the same field as last year.
Yeah. Well,
Gotcha.
you have general guidances. I mean, buyers make tours of all the growing regions permanently. So, yeah.
And there's so I grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas. And this was always an ongoing issue with the grain elevators and the millers and the bakers. They wanted consistency. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
For all those reasons you just pointed out, like the bakers, they don't want to burn their pizzas or their or their loaves of bread, and they want it to hold together and not fall apart.
Yeah.
But they don't want it too hard, and so you got to get the consistency. And so there was always this battle between the growers and the bakers. What do you breed for, quality or yield? And the
Well,
farmers don't care about yield, milling qualities or baking quality. They want the yield. And so it was one of those things well, ultimately, if you're going to sell bushels of seed, you're selling to the farmer. So you got to invest or breed for yield. And
same thing in rice.
yeah,
Same thing in U.S. rice.
yeah, that's what I've been hearing. It's been a problem with rice as well. But there was just a quick story in Kansas. There was this region of Kansas that was planting this one variety from Kansas State, very high yielding, but the milling quality was terrible. It was called Everest. And so the millers said, okay, no more wheat from this part of Kansas. And so the basis just widened out. And of course, the farmers were not happy about that. But the millers were serious about this. They said, listen, we can't take this wheat because we have to blend it out. We have to do all these things to it because it's so poor quality for milling and baking purposes. And so at any rate, that hasn't gone away yet because farmers still want to grow for a yield. Now there's starting to be some more direct relationships with segregation to incentivize farmers to segregate and pay farmers for the right protein levels, those kind of things. But it's an evolution process, similar to kind of what we're seeing with rice. Sounds
Well, in
like.
rice, it started, at the beginning of the appearance of the hybrids, which are the reason why the yields grew
Yes.
significantly and the quality deteriorated.
Right.
The mills, in mostly the independent mills, were able to widen the bases and paid less if you deliver to them. They try to take out the interest of the farmers by lowering the price of the new hybrids in contrast to the old varietal rices. But you have big co-ops in Arkansas, and obviously the co-ops have that thing that the farmers have a big influence on the decisions of management too. And the hybrids today, just flooded the market in the US. So it's a big mix of hybrids of many or a few of quite a few origins. It's a very complex process to hybridize rice, very expensive, extremely expensive. And until now, as far as I know, I worked as a consultant for Rice Tech, which is one of the main companies developing hybrid rice for many years now. And until now, it had been very difficult to make a conciliation between high yields, farm yields, physical yields, and quality. It looks as though it's opposite ends of the spectrum of genetics somehow. The higher the yield, the lower the quality in hybrids. And now research is finding new traits in conventional varieties that's growing. I think there is a growth of conventional varieties in relation to hybrids with high yields, not probably as high as hybrids, but high enough and better quality. And now we have the difficulty in some areas of the segregation at harvest, because that's another issue. It's useless to produce something that has a high quality if you're going to mix it with something else which doesn't have it. You just make a poor product and that's it. So, and segregation is not something that is widely used worldwide. There are very few places where they do segregate for specific varieties, Uruguay being one of them. And the good times of enough water in Australia segregated very well. And probably there are some areas in many countries that do that, but they are minority in relation to those that mix up whatever they get. And in the US, it's almost impossible to segregate because you have, I don't know, maybe Milo knows much better than me, but around 30, 40 hybrids. And you cannot say, no, this one goes to that bin and that one goes to that. It's impossible. At harvest time, it's almost impossible. The structure you need, the infrastructure you need to segregate is extremely, I mean, you have to duplicate or treble the amount of reception bins and dryers and silos and everything. And that's expensive, very expensive.
Right. Well, that's, I think, a good primer for our, or a segue into our paper that we're writing at CoBank. Sure. Well, this is one of the issues that that we're struggling with at CoBank, where I work as an economist. And our research is focused on finding the risks and opportunities in our respective sectors. And I focus on, one of my focuses is rice. And just stop me when I start boring you, Ricardo. But as you know, the amount of imports into the U.S. continues to go up, mostly fragrant rice. And our acreage, on the other hand, is not expanded at the same rate. Domestic consumption is going up, imports are going up, but we're not really following that trend. The U.S., our customers are not really following or capturing this upward trend in consumption and imports. And so the question is, ultimately, how are our borrowers and thus CoBank going to be affected by this continuing, if this trend continues, and what is behind the trend as well? And so just some thoughts that Milo and I have put together. And Milo, please go ahead and insert your own thoughts here if I miss anything. But we've got a trend here of specifically jasmine and to a lesser extent, basmati coming into the U.S. We do have jasmine, for instance, varieties, other fragrant varieties that are bred for the U.S., but the U.S. simply has not captured that market share. More and more of our market share is going to foreign varieties. Yeah. And so the issue here is, why is that? What is driving this? Is this a demographical change? Are people just wanting more of an experience with their food, more flavorful experience? And who are these people? Are they Asian immigrants? Are they native uh, white Americans or traditional consumers, or the ethnic consumers? Are they coming from other rice varieties? Are they leaving traditional long grain rice and going to Thai jasmine? Are they leaving potatoes and pancakes and going over to Thai jasmine? Uh, so some other thoughts. There's some thoughts there about who the driver is on this at the consumer level, and then at the producer level is what are the why hasn't the U.S. captured this market? Is it because of the infrastructure issue for the segregation cost? Is it because our varieties do not sell to the U.S. consumer, or these consumers, or the U.S. is the U.S. consumer so discerning, perhaps, that they don't like the U.S. jasmine varieties and that they will only accept the Thai jasmine? Or is there something else going on there? Perhaps our varieties don't work here as well. The farmers that we have talked to, that Milo has as customers, will tell you that that jasmine is their most profitable crop. So profit is not the limiting factor here. Perhaps it's grower perception. Perhaps growers just continue to grow hybrids for long grain because they want to play the yield game and not the profit game. So that's what we're trying to feel out here. And then in this paper that Milo and I are co-authoring, we'll have some conclusions and some concluding thoughts that on how the U.S. can participate in this if possible. And if not, then we're going to continue to see an erosion of market share ultimately if we don't adapt. So that is really the paper that we're working on. And we appreciate your thoughts on this from what you've seen from your vantage point.
Okay.
Could I interrupt with my 10 slides and then we'll come back to that question?
Yeah.
This is just general. It's partly on what's happening in the US versus.
Louder, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. So it's partly about Asia and the Americas, but it's also related to what Tanner's very well presented. So I want to shift here and just look at the world, US and Asia, for 10 minutes, okay?
Okay.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. What is different about the Americas rice versus the Asian rice market? That's my question that I'm trying to address in these 10 slides. It's a vast issue, but I've tried to boil it down to some factors. If you look at the spreadsheet for Asia versus the Americas, only about 5% of the rice produced in the Americas is part of the world production. The other part is, just one second here. The other part is Asia, which is 89% of world consumption and production. And if you look at two big players, one in the Americas and one in Asia, in India and China, or Chindia, about 60% of Asia consumption and production is produced in China and India. So they're the big elephants. In the Western Hemisphere, which is very small, Brazil and the US are a big part, like 58%, I believe. So it's very similar. Hold on a second here. Very similar. The big ones in the West are Brazil and the US, and the big ones in the world and in Asia are India and China. So let's look a little closer at these two markets. America is only 5% of world rice production, or about 30 million metric tons. One asks the question why there's so much rice coming out of Asia, not just for their own consumers, but in world trade. And the answer, I think, is partly that they've had very good weather for the last 15 years, and they may continue to have that, particularly in India, which does not irrigate enough to take care of their production. And it's starting off pretty well here. The monsoon is may have some problems in July, but we shall see. 16 years is a long time, because if you look at the period before, can you see that? It's been very raggedy in China and in India. And then starting about 2005, we had very good rice weather. I have no idea why this is the case. I've heard some hypothesis from climatologists, but I'm an economist, not a climatologist. If you look at the production of the 5 exporters in South America versus the US, the production is stagnant. It goes up, it goes down. It's sideways since 2000. It went up when the price went up, and now it's starting to trail back off again, both in South America and the US. And in the US, it goes up and down depending upon the price of beans, and production is basically going nowhere. Whereas in Asia, production is going up. It's going up in China and also in the rest of the exporting nations of Asia. And they're capturing the world trade, and the Americas is just unable to compete on a price and so forth basis with the Far East. One of the factors that's happening now that could be a slight influence this year is that the price of corn is high in China. This is futures at Dalian. And whereas the price of rice is actually going down since I did this slide. And we're starting to see the feeding out of both wheat and rice in China. This is just recently updated this week. An estimate now is that 33 million metric tons of rice will be fed out in China, and 36 million metric tons of wheat. So I've kind of added onto this bar. That'd be about 69 million metric tons in total, which is without precedent. In the previous 4 years, as they got shorter and shorter corn, they used up more of their government inventories. This is coming out of their reserves, not from imports, but from their reserves. And last year, wheat appeared and a little bit of rice. And this year, it's now looking with the latest estimate that it could be up to 69 or 70 million metric tons of what is normally a food grain being fed out. And the implications of this are fairly staggering when you think about it, because 33 million metric tons out of an inventory, it's hard to say 100 million metric tons in China, that's a big chunk of change. And so we're just on the edge of this thing now, halfway through the year. But I'm getting more convinced that a great deal of wheat and rice will be fed out, okay? Just a footnote, it doesn't change what Tanner and I are looking at so much, but it could actually impact the price by the end of the year. If you look at back to the Americas now, I really wasn't here to present about Asia. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Ricardo?
Yes.
Okay. Rice consumption and imports in the US. For the since 1980, consumption of rice has been skyrocketing, and it's taken off again. I don't know whether this number is correct or not. My customers say that's way too high. We've got a lot of problems with the balance sheet in the US, but in general, this suggests to me that the consumption of rice in the US is going up. But not only is the consumption of rice in the US going up, but imports from Asia, which Tanner mentioned, and I'd like to finish up our discussion with, are also skyrocketing. And since production in the US is fairly stagnant in acreage, these imports are not necessarily yet taking away acreage from the US. I think it may have contributed to the stagnation of production in the US, but they're not taking over yet. It's about 1 million to 31 million tons of long grain are coming in from outside the US as aromatics. So let's hold that again. The thing that interested me, and this doesn't relate to our discussion of the US market directly, is that I see production in the Americas among exporters, Brazil in particular, as going down, not up, since probably about 2008. And very different trajectory than the US, where domestic consumption is going up. Imports in Brazil are stagnant. So As production goes down, it's not being filled by foreign rices. It's just that consumption is going down. So we have a very different consumption curve, Ricardo, than we have in the US. And that is, I think, what I want to discuss. I think that's the last slide. I want to discuss why the two sectors are performing so differently, and whether you've got any insights into the literally about a 2 million metric ton collapse in consumption in Brazil. Do you have any thoughts on what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the issue is an issue of domestic consumption per capita in 1980, 40 years ago in the US, and 40 years ago in Brazil. And that's the starting point. And they were absolutely different. I don't know, the US consumption per capita today in 2020 or 2021, how much is it? But probably not above 15 or 16 pounds per capita today, after all this rise, after all this increase. While in the 80s in Brazil, people ate probably close to 50 kilos per capita per year. Population in Brazil 40 years ago was probably 150 million. Today it's 210 million. I don't know how much the US has grown in the same period, but the starting point is radically different. And there, yes, you have a big input, I think, not only of Asian immigration, which is heavily impacting the per capita consumption in Brazil, but also Latin immigration, which, by the way, eats less than the Asians, but eats a lot of rice too, per capita. And then you go to Brazil, where you had let's say, a very precarious, an undeveloped economy 40 years ago. And as time has progressed in these last 40 years, gross national product has grown dramatically. More than 50% of the population of Brazil is already middle class. And those people, instead of continuing to eat rice and beans, started to eat more protein. And you have the biggest poultry production in the world and the biggest exporters of poultry in the world in Brazil. You have a massive growth in pork production in Brazil also. And not to be less, you have an enormous amount of beef. The herd in Brazil is probably something like 200 million head. And well, the Brazilian companies, protein companies, have taken over, let's say, international trade. They are very strongly present in the US itself. They're very large. So you have all these impacts on the Brazilian population. As income grows, what happens to rice consumption? It drops. And income has grown, and the development of the cities has been dramatic and disorderly, and with all the violence. But essentially, it takes out rice per capita consumption. So I think today maybe we're talking 32 kilos per capita, 33, something like that. A massive drop, and it will continue to drop. So that's why the Brazilian market is looking more, not as much as the Uruguayan market, which exports 95% of its production, but it's good. It's looking closer to what happened in Uruguay, or what is happening in Uruguay forever, because we never ate much rice anyway. So we had to export anything we produced. And Brazil, you see, has these influxes of exports as crops grow in yield. They start exporting large volumes of rice competitively, because they have to get them out of the market. Otherwise, the domestic market destroys itself. And with the destruction of the domestic market, there's no government intervention anymore in Brazil. Hasn't had it for 5-6 years. And they discovered what? That it doesn't matter what the government holds in stocks or not. The world trade has changed so much. And the feeling of the markets of being able to supply themselves of any need, whatever size it has, quickly and effectively, has made stocks like the Chinese and the Indian stocks basically a problem of food security for the very poor in those countries, for the rural areas maybe, and more so in India. But in the essence, nothing happens. Brazil has zero rice in government stocks, zero. Nothing happens. The price goes up, goes down, it moves freely. When the price goes too much up, they reduce the import duty for third countries, and it immediately levels the prices. And essentially, I think that's the difference. We are living in a world in which rice itself has been, let's say, the demand of rice has been fragmented into different tranches, and you have to find your niche. And in the US, with high purchasing power and the influence of a lot of Asian people immigrating into the US, you have this new thing, which is probably not more than 10, 15-year-old, of bringing in jasmine rice and basmati rice into the US. I think because many people, it's a mixture of things, Tanner. I think there are those who eat it and come from traditional consumption of that type of rice, essentially immigrants, and the sons and the descendants of those immigrants. And then there's a fashion thing. If something costs 50% more for somebody, I mean, rice is the cheapest thing that there is around anyway. So if it costs $1 a kilo or $2 a kilo, for the US pocket, it's irrelevant. So if something costs $2 a kilo and it has this aromatic thing and it comes from, traditionally 2,000-year-old areas of cultivation, maybe it's nice and they pay it. And that's how it works, I think. It's a fashion. And by the way, it's very nice rice to eat. Very nice rice to eat. I think the aroma is the least important characteristic. These are very long grain, extremely long grain rices that have, on top of their nice aspect and loose and hard looking cooking, they have this aroma. But the aroma comes with it. I think that the thing that is more attractive is the length of the grain, which is in raw, in some varieties of basmati, I don't know exactly Thai jasmine, but in basmati you have grain that is 11 millimeters long in uncooked, and rice, long grain rice from the US or from Uruguay, barely passes 7 millimeters. But when you cook the basmati, there's a variety called 1121, which is 11 millimeters long uncooked, and when you cook it, it's like a small noodle because it goes to 21 millimeters. That's 2.1 centimeters. It's a very long and thin rice. Looks nice. It's exotic, and people with money likes exotism. I mean, you can use you can drink Johnny Walker Red to go to something like Scotch whiskey. And those that are more sophisticated like to drink Macallans. Johnny Walker Red costs $12, $14, I don't know, something like that, probably. Macallans costs $160.
Right.
And it's whiskey. It's nice. It's expensive, so people think it's more, it's like wine in the end. You go and buy a fantastic Napa Valley wine, and it costs probably half or one third of what a good Burgundy wine costs, or one of those, whatever. It's has a lot of implications of that respect, especially in high purchasing power societies. Uh, it's a gigantic market, the US, in terms of numbers. So
Right.
if it's fashionable to eat, what is it, 1 million tons of imports, and most of it is aromatic. No big deal. It's, the problem we have in the rice sector is that for us, rice is like the center of the world. We look at our own belly button somehow, and we think that the world, yeah, the world, it depends on rice, and rice this and Milo and that, and in the end, it's meaningless in terms of economical importance to the economies of developed countries, or to, they react more to the lobby of the farmer, poor farmer, and this and that. But I was, just as an anecdote, one of our main markets, and when I speak about us, we speak about the US, South America, is Iraq. Very complex market, very difficult market, with all the situations domestically. And now they changed, for some reason or the other, they changed the way they buy the rice, at least temporarily, from tenders to direct purchases by the private sector in association with the public sector, I think because of lack of money. And they decided to buy rice in South America. And the US rice millers and farmers got nuts because, no, they're ignoring us and this and that and blah, 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 all kinds of noise. And then they got some letters from congressmen to the Iraqi authorities protesting and this and that. And then I said, wait a minute. Does the US really care about the importance of US rice sales to Iraq with all the other massive items of significance, call it oil, weapons, security? And are they going to bother 1 second to push for rice? If rice is something they say, hey, don't push me on rice. I want to decide what I want. Let's speak about oil, or let's speak about, I don't know what, the missiles I'm going to need for the next week. This is our problem, in a way, that in the Western world, rice is basically meaningless. Maybe for Uruguay or for Brazil, it's a more relevant thing because we are agriculturally oriented, and nothing. We have very little influence on the decisions of the government, very little. The Brazilians, I don't see them much having any impact. And then you go to other places, and countries do whatever they want, and whatever their convenience is, if it's in favor of the imports or not, and in favor of us or not, they don't care. And imagine the US with their massive interests in other things which are really relevant. Just imagine, oh, am I going to push for the sale of 100,000 tons of rice, or, I don't know, 100 F-35s?
Very good question.
I'm sorry, but it's bringing down to reality, our sad reality. And I think that, nothing. As the world evolves, we have very serious problems in rice. I think that the rice farmers are getting old, and I am not sure that the new generations are so interested in rice as the previous generations were. I think there are many, many challenges in that area. It's a hard job. Sometimes it's a frustrating job. You have to live on farm. It grows in the summer when it's hot. I don't know. I think that many countries have problems with the age of the farmers and the big barrier that it implies to go into rice, because it's not a cheap option. You have to have special machinery, and you have to have the machinery. Very difficult to work with rentals and stuff, because the opportunity is very narrow. The windows of opportunity in rice, when you need to do a certain job, you have to do it. You don't have, okay, I'll do it in 2 weeks' time. It's over. So you have to have these. And the barriers, I think, are high. And people start looking around and say, well, look at us for the last 50 years. How many of us have been so successful that we are, diversifying or not? And I don't have a reply to that, but I'm worried because I see that the renovation of farmers in South America is very low. It's not really a nice incentive if you make, I don't know, 10% return on rice with all the risks and all the, headaches. It's a high water consumption issue also, conservation, sustainability in the future. There's so many challenges, Neither Milo nor myself will be able to solve them, nor see them probably as they turn mature and they are, new challenges. But I don't know. I don't think that this issue of the imports is probably fashion mostly, and I don't know if we are able to substitute that. I don't know if the aromatic rices of the U.S. Compete in aroma and in cooking quality with the imports. I am not sure about that. I know that in Uruguay they've been trying for the last 30 years without much success, to say the least. Much or less doesn't work. For the time being, it doesn't work.
Can I ask you a question then? In the
Yeah.
light?
Sorry, I took so long.
No, it's fascinating. When you talk, I realize how little I really know.
No.
And so, is the is there less immigration from Asia into Brazil than there is into the U.S.?
Much less.
Why is that?
Yeah, it's very simple. At one time, the Japanese community had a very strong influx from Japan to Brazil, because it was in the, I don't know, it's been 100 years ago. So they came from, let's say, a very harsh situation in Japan, probably poor people, underfed, like we had the Spanish in Uruguay and Argentina, or the Italians, where people were starving. And they came here looking for some way of relief. But today, if you have the chance of going you have to choose between going to the US, where you have the best education and a high standard of living, or to go to Brazil. I think that it's a no-brainer.
Gotcha. That's what I thought. I just wanted you to tell me, I guess. Okay, well, I really appreciate the time you spent with us, Ricardo, and maybe we could come back and give you an update in a couple of weeks as to how it's going for us. And would you mind reviewing what we're putting together as a draft?
No, not at all.
Do you have any questions out of what we've talked about today from your own self or from us, or any of that? Any questions?
No, I would like Tanner to ask if he has any things that are not clear to him. I have no questions.
No, this has been really helpful, Ricardo. No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with some of the things that we've been hearing from others, and it kind of confirms our own theory about why we haven't been able to capture, or why we haven't been able to expand our acreage on this. I think we need to know more of what the consumer is looking for precisely. Are they looking for the longer grain? Do they like that? And the aroma? Well, can we duplicate that? And If we haven't been able to, why not? And who the consumer is. It sounds like a lot of Asian immigrants and descendants of Asian immigrants.
Yeah, and I would say honestly that I think that let's say elites in the U.S. cities, walk, to
Yeah.
put it anyway, also probably consume a lot of that because it's fashion and
Yes. Yes.
it's expensive, so it must have some characteristic that they like. It's the Macallan of rice.
Right. Yes. All right.
The, have they produced any varieties down there, Jasmine or Basmati, that are of any interest to you, just from the technical point of view or taste point of view, Ricardo? In Brazil?
They are trying, but it's not easy. Obviously, it's very difficult because otherwise it would have been produced way before in the US and here and anywhere where there's research. So I have no idea of the latest developments. I know they're testing a lot of varieties, maybe even original basmatis that they exchange the seed with experiment stations in, I don't know, Pakistan or in India.
No.
I don't know exactly, but for the time being, it's just wishful thinking.
My end.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. I had a
Yes.
sneaking suspicion this would be a great educational thing for Tanner and I. That's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, I agree. This has been wonderful.
No, I really try, to not to lose the perspective and be as realistic as possible as to the relatively low importance of rice overall developed economy, because you have to have that into account. Otherwise, if it would be very important, the amount of government intervention in the US or in Brazil, like it was before, it would be much bigger, like it is in China or like it is in India. And I see China slowly, starting to take it out. They are seeing that who cares? I mean, we can make it come if we need. We can import, and if we don't need, storing this enormous amount of rice, what for? Then you have to give it to the pigs.
The production, the amount of feed that is now being forecast, rice feed to animals in China this year, is equal to the total production in the Americas. Just China for rice for feed, that 33 million metric tons is roughly what the entire Western Hemisphere produces in a year.
Yeah.
And that's really bumped into how incredibly small rice is in our own backyard.
Well, we are very few. You and me and a few others, and most of them are getting together in the woodlands today. That's it. And a few guys in Asia. I mean, probably you get, I don't know, 1,500 people, and you are in 85% of the world trade.
Yeah.
It's small.
And world trade is a small part of the consumption and production of rice.
Yeah. And it's grown dramatically. When I started working, it was 10 million tons a year.
No.
And now it's 45, 47.
Yeah.
Has it changed very much? No, it has not.
It's all the same way. Japan, Korea.
You go probably to the constant US dollars of 1974 till today, prices in real US dollars, constant US dollars, are probably down.
They are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye,
Bye.
Tanner.
Bye-bye.